Sí.
¿Y dónde van? ¿Qué quiere que hagan puntos?
Pues el de los puntos, el de los miles va aquí. El del 0 y el 7 va al punto de los miles. No, no es millón.
¿Hay puntos?
A los miles. Ahí, exacto.
¿Y la coma?
Esa es la coma, sí, señor.
Entonces sería 230.737
Con 15.
con 15.
Colombia. Colombia.
Papi, mire, mire, papi. Los buceadores quieren descender hasta una profundidad de 57,6 metros.
5. 57,5 metros.
57,5 metros. ¿Cuánto les falta para llegar al fondo?
Y en el fondo está a 31,25.
Good evening, students. Do you hear me?
Y es que restarle, aquí está la respuesta.
Teacher. Good evening, teacher.
Good evening. Okay, please encounter. Good evening. In this encounter, we are going to, I'm going to share with you a project that was carried out with 4th graders. And then we are going to discuss some skills that we develop as teachers. Okay, and this is a project that was carried out for Sandra Dolores Niño. She was a teacher for 4th graders. And what she used was a link that was offered for free by the British Council to connect her students with students in India. What they did was to prepare a scrapbook, which is like an album with pictures and some sentences to describe the photos, the pictures. And well, these students work on that scrapbook about different cultural information from Colombia. And then they share the information with students in India through a video conference by using the link provided by the British Council. They use the video conference. They share personal information, their likes, poems, and the scrapbooks that they made. And with those series of exercises, they developed different skills, which were they improved their vocabulary, their writing, listening, reading, and speaking, as well as pronunciation. They work on writing, rewriting, and revising. They integrated contents, so all cultural information from Colombia with the language. And that was meaningful for them because they were going to share the information with a person or children that didn't know much about our country. They developed their cultural awareness. They learned about culture in India. They were more sensitive towards differences, and they developed their knowledge about the use of internet to communicate. Remember that they were fourth graders, so they were about 10 years old. After that experience, after that project, the teacher continued with other ones. One about fiestas. She developed that with fifth and sixth graders. And then she had a project about flora and fauna with first graders. They work on songs, poems, albums, photographs, letters, and presentations. She continued using the same link provided by the British Council. So the idea by sharing this information with you is to have you like see an example of some projects that can be used in primary school. Do you guys have questions? Okay, so the second part of this encounter is about the teaching skills that we need to develop. So, what skills do you consider that we need to develop? And what aspects can influence on students' learning?
Well, I think that one of the skills that teachers need to develop to promote learning is a good communication, good reception of from students, also to discuss about real topics and give students the time for them to communicate themselves, I mean, for thinking. Also to have the time to listen to them and to correct them a little bit, the pronunciation, or to provide them with guides to build the sentences, and to give confidence, and basically to be teacher needs to be a partner of the students, instead of to show that that person is a teacher. And I think that's the most important things for teachers to promote learning, in my opinion.
Okay, that's a complete list. Blanca, thank you. Does anybody want to add other skill to the ones that Blanca just mentioned?
I think listening is one of the most important skills, because it also is related with how I understand language, how can I use it, but also is more related with the human behavior that we have. It's not only just listen to our students by saying, teacher, how do you say togar? It's a slide. Just not saying the example or making translation. It's about more about their feelings. Just listen. And sometimes we saw teachers that students ask something about language or other things, and they just look at them just like that you already noted, or you didn't pay attention. So that's it, and go ahead. It's more about the human aspect that we can develop. Not only just listening, then is understanding too.
Okay, that's very important because nobody's going to learn something from someone he or she doesn't like, and if you have empathy towards your students, so chances are that they learn more. So it is important to listen to them. Some people are very good at that, other teachers just develop it through the experience. Um, okay, here Sandra Milena wrote in the chat that it's important to be creative and innovative. First, what's the difference between being creative and being innovative? There is a difference. Do you guys know what is the difference?
Teacher, I think creativity is the matter to create, to organize your idea, and innovate is how are you going to expose, how you're going to propose, to take it into the practice, that ideas that you figure, that things that you imagine that you're going to create and produce.
No, innovation is not related to the way you present, what you create. But what create, as you said, is to do something, right? And what is innovate?
To innovate will be to do something new, something that hasn't been done.
Exactly. So being innovative is more difficult because it's the ability to do something that is not that has not been done before, that is actually new, right? So Blanca wrote innovation is to expose something new, something different. Exactly.
I got one skill that I would like to remark, and it's classroom management. I consider that to be one of the most important skills because if we do have a good vision on the classroom, we do have a good understanding of students and all learners' needs, and we do plan a good lesson. If we don't get manage the classroom properly, the behaviors, no matter how well we plan the lesson, it definitely will not work out. It would all be a mess, and there will scarcely be some kind of learning at the end. And that's on the teacher's side, how the teacher manages behaviors and relationships among students in the classroom to make an effective lesson.
That's totally true, Giancarlo. So we're going to share like different strategies that we use to manage the classroom. That reminds me that when I started teaching, I started with preschoolers, and my experience was with adults. So when I arrived to the classroom, I started teaching like with activities for adults, and it was a mess. It was a mess, and what I learned was to be more active, to change the activities more often, to play games with them, and in that way I got their attention because they were preschoolers, so they were never going to learn in the same way that I was used to teach adults. What strategies do you guys use when trying to control discipline or to set the rules?
What teacher? Me.
Flora.
In my case, I think that is very important that the topic that teacher present should be interest for the student. And the way that the teacher used to present the topic is very important. Besides, I consider that we as a teacher, we have to involve the students in the class. Because when in the classroom or in the class, when the teacher is the center of the class, the students of course are bored. But if you involve the students, you propose any activities when the students have the opportunity to participate, to ask questions, to answer, to give their ideas, the interaction among students and teacher and partners and everybody will be that the class is interesting for them, not only for the teacher because it's the guide of the information, but also for the students because they feel that the teacher involved themselves into the class.
Okay, so two of the aspects that you mentioned are the topic that needs to be interesting and the activities, right? So they also have, both of them have an influence on the discipline of the class. Which others have an influence on the discipline? How can we focus the students' attention?
Well, teacher, I think that with the teenagers, we can talk with them and say the thing. And I mean, we can ask the student what happened, what he or she need to say, to do, and it's different with teenagers. But with kids, I can do the same with them because most of the time they don't know why they are bothered other students. I don't know. It's different.
Okay, so talking to students is effective, right?
Yeah.
Important. Which
But
other?
when they are, I don't know, like 11, 12 teenagers. But when they are little kids, it's difficult and it's different. For instance, if they started to fight with a specific student because the students they fight for the pencil, for a toy, for a bad word, and I don't know.
So in those cases when they start fighting, we also need to talk to them when they are preschoolers or primary school students.
Yeah.
And it's even more important that we talk to them about how to socialize, how to act, how to behave in the classroom, because during those years they are learning that at school. That's why in some schools, some places for preschool, the students just go there to socialize and they don't learn much about concepts, or they don't learn much information, but they are in that place for the purpose of socializing and developing that part. Okay, and Sandra wrote, Blanca wrote, to maintain the student focus could be one strategy for classroom management, activating students. Okay, does any of you have like a strategy that is, besides talking to students, do you guys have other strategy that is effective?
Teacher, I think personalizing classes is very useful. I mean, for example, as teachers, we need to know a little bit about the students And it's not the same. For example, we are going to talk about, our topic is, for example, soccer or football. It's not the same talking about people from another country that talking about the Colombian team, or talking about the I don't know, about a local team or.
Okay, yes. What you mentioned also is related to the idea of choosing a good topic, an interesting one, and choosing good activities for the class. So that helps to focus the students' attention to keep them to keep the discipline in the class. Okay, let's see from the list that you mentioned about teachers' skills. So some of you wrote also. Some of you, or you have not talked about, or you have not mentioned about how to give instructions. What do we have to take into account when we give instructions?
Teacher, for saying something, what I do is first, at the first class we have, we make and socialize some class agreements. And we share our ideas about the class agreements, and the students write down in their notebook. And then in all the classes, in the board, I write the lesson plan, I write the main instructions of the activity, and then I explain just each one of it and the way they are going to make it. But I give them different times for saying something. Work group. In this work group, you are going to join yourself in groups of 4 students. Another point. Write down the questions about any topic. Another point. And try to follow some steps that I already planned for that activity.
Teacher?
Okay, Francisco?
Yes, teacher. Firstly, I think we have to give contextualization to the students in order to start giving instructions. Because through the contextualization, the students are able to understand the topic he's going to develop. So I think contextualization through videos or flashcards in beginners level, I consider is so important contextualization in order to them can catch the idea of the task we are going to develop.
Okay, so that's important. You and Sharon mentioned it. What Sharon does is to write on the board what they are going to study. And what you do is to use visual aids to help the students understand what they are going to study. That's important so they understand what it is expected from them during the lesson, or to help them focus their attention on the topic that is going to be discussed. Something important that Sharon also mentioned is the idea of mentioning the stages of a task. So if students have to go through 4 stages, so it is important to mention them first, second, third, and fourth, using very simple words. So as shorter and and, and more, I mean, we need to use simple and short instructions so they get the idea without any difficulty. Blanca wrote, I think even age-appropriate instructions could be making explanations as simple as possible. Very good. And Giancarlo wrote, I might have a technique. So Giancarlo, please share the technique with us.
Yes, it was basically what you mentioned. when I took the training to become a Cambridge examiner for the May suite, I remember the one thing that they emphasized a lot was the use of gestures when you're talking to the students. So the first thing that you need to take into account is the language that you use, because most of the instructions fail because not because the cognitive skills of the students or attention skills on the student side, but because the way the teachers provide the instructions. Because sometimes teachers want to talk like teachers, and we want to use language that is very complex for students' um, level of English. So using very simple, short, not extended, not complex, not full of phrasal verbs or any other construction that is not familiar for students, but also the use of gesture. For example, there is a you guys won't see me because my camera is not working, but there is a gesture that we use in order to say talk together. It's like you take both of your hands with your hands open, and while you say talk together, all you do is you close your hand together one to each other. And as you do this in your classes with several other gestures that you accompany to spoken instructions, even those students who are sitting in the last rows of the class that might not be listening to your voice, when they see the gesture, they will immediately understand, if you fail with your voice, that you're giving an instruction that they have to work together, they have to work in pairs, they have to work individually, the type of tasks they had to complete based on the type of gesture that you provide the students, accompany with your spoken in very clear and simple English instructions.
Thanks. That's very important, and it's very effective when we are teaching beginners, right? So they don't know much. They don't know many words. So they can see our gestures to try to find out what we are trying to communicate. So that's very important, and that is called roof tuning the language. Roof tuning the language, sorry. So it means that we can use gestures or visual aids or simple words to communicate according to the level that we have, that we are teaching. So if we are teaching advanced students, we will need less gestures probably and visual aids, and we can speak faster, and we can use more complex sentences, and we can use more vocabulary. That with beginners, what we do is to use cognates, which are those words that are similar to Spanish. For example, group. Group is a word that is a little bit similar to the word in Spanish. So we use words and gestures and short sentences and simple vocabulary when we talk with beginners. And we change it when we talk with other levels that have more knowledge. Lira wrote, when giving instructions, it is important to get students' attention, then be clear about the instruction and make sure your students understood the instruction. Very good. So those stages are very important. So first, we need to call students' attention. Then we give the instruction in a clear way, and then we need to make sure they have understood. Sometimes when I watch the videos, I see that teachers, for example, provide students with the worksheets first, and then they give the instruction. And that doesn't work very well sometimes because students get distracted with the worksheet and they don't pay attention to the teacher's instructions. So first we call the student's attention, then we give the clear instruction, and then we can tell a student in the classroom to use Spanish if they are beginners, to explain what they have to do in order to make sure everybody have understood. Or just give an example, to tell a student to give an example of what they have to do in order to make sure they have understood.
Teacher.
Yes.
One thing that I learned is to reinforce your instructions is that you can make CCQs and ICQs, concept checking questions and instruction checking questions. For example, if you're telling them that they have to join the dark colors, you can ask them, is black color? Talking about instructions, you can tell them how many time do you have for finishing the activity, for example, like that.
So I didn't get very well the idea about the colors. So I got the idea that it is important to give them, to tell them the time they have to finish the activity. But what about the colors? Could you explain the idea again?
There are two things, teacher, CCQs, concept checking questions. You have to see if they are aware or if they understood what you them. That's why I gave you the example of the instruction checking questions. You reinforce your instructions with those two different kinds of asking something, so to reinforce the instructions.
Okay, I got the idea now. So by checking that they have understood the instruction, we are reinforcing the instruction.
Instructions and concepts, because sometimes they don't understand what you are asking them about. So you reinforce the instruction and the concept.
Okay, very good. Good. So that's a way to check instructions and concepts. And well, before checking instructions and concepts, as Lida wrote, it is important to focus the students' attention on the instructions. If they don't get what they have to do, then we will create indiscipline in the classroom. They will get a mess. So we need to make sure that they pay attention to the instructions and later on to ask questions to make sure that they have understood, as Sandra has mentioned. Very good. Sandra Roth begin by explaining very clearly the objectives. That's important so they understand what they have to do of each topic or unit. And then write on the board the important words and add images and diagrams to achieve a greater focus on the key points. See the students who do not pay much attention in the front, teach them to take notes, deliver materials and supplements to complete the classes, offer small rewards to those who follow instructions better. Okay, those rewards can be just like a positive word, right? Like you are doing well, you're very good, or excellent. So that can be the reward that they get for paying attention. So all those ideas mentioned by Sandra are important and are effective. And something that she wrote reminded me that with preschoolers and primary school students, we need to make sure that they don't have anything on their desks because they get distracted with the pencil case, with the eraser, with anything they have on the desk. So with them, we need to make sure they don't have anything close to them, and they they can see us while we give them the instructions. So we need to have the visual contact with them. Okay, any other strategy or important thing about giving instructions? No? Okay, Lida wrote, modeling the activity would be helpful for learners to understand. Right, we can model it, or we can have a student model that exercise for us. That's also a good strategy. Okay, what about the use of the L1? What do you think about using Spanish?
Well, teacher, in my case, now this year I'm teaching in 6th grade, and there is a bilingual grade. So beside of the mandatory things, it's necessary to speak in English because they need to improve their listening, and as well as they continue listening the vocabulary and the other language, they improve their listening. But sometimes I think with monolingual students it's important to make clear about some words in Spanish, not all the time, but when it's necessary with those kind of students. But with bilingual students, I use all the time, I'm speaking in English to them.
Okay, Sharon, thank you. So Sharon says that sometimes it is necessary to use Spanish.
Teacher.
What do you think?
At morning today, I have the opportunity to read an article to EF that you publish in a virtual room. Yes, we have the opportunity to recognize some important structures and some important characteristics about the last methods for try to teach English, and now methods for try to teach English. Yes, so very interesting when the people in this article say that before always try to speak or try to improve each one of the skills, and when they try to talk about the skills as possible, you are listening, speaking, reading and writing. Yeah, but now you have other kind of skills that you need to interpersonal, communicated, and the other ones. Yes, and I thought that continue right now continue to try to focus in this part. About your question is how much do you consider that the teacher should use the L1 in a lesson, specifically Spanish? Sometimes it's important, but depends a lot of your body language and the different expressions that you can use in your class. For example, if you have the first time you stayed in your with the students, as the first time that you can see, it's a really difficult just try to speak all the time in English, because first of all, obviously you need to know research the level in English for your students and other kind of things. Yes, and sometimes it's important the Spanish, but the proposal is try to class per class you try to speak more in English than in Spanish, and just not for the improve the listening. It's for try to improve about the culture, improve about a lot of things that when you try to interaction in English. Yes. For example, I work in a school. It's not a bilingual school, but the English has 8 hours per week. Yes, 2 hours for days. That's a good kind of. There's so many hours for English. That's really interesting because at the first time I can speak all the time in English because students can understand me, and if they can understand me, it's possible they don't show the interest for the class, and they say, okay, that's boring. As possible, you lose the connection and lose the other important characteristics that you need to open in the mind for them. But after to based some months that I can speak all the time in English and they are understand, because always you try to really pay attention to the instructions. Yes, When you try to say it in your classroom, as possible, you try to make the same instructions all the time. Yeah, they say, okay, do it that, or work in pairs. So yes, add some kind of specific commands to the class, and as possible, your students recognize this vocabulary and continues to exercise. But actually depends on the confidence that you have your students, the production of obviously your body language, and the different characteristics. Is it possible you don't use the L1, in this case Spanish, in your class? But I consider in the first months as really important, because just speaking English is possible to close the mind of your students, and this is the worst things that you can do, because after the student lose the interest in a class, it's really difficult to try to improve the other skills. It depends whatever ones.
Thank you, John. So far, Sharon, Blanca, and John have mentioned that some of the factors or aspects that we need to take into account in order to decide if we use Spanish or not is the knowledge that a student have about English, the level they have, and also if we have used other strategies to make ourselves understood. If we have used gestures or other short sentences and they don't get the idea, so we need to use Spanish. Any other uh, aspect that you think should be taken into account in order to decide if we can use Spanish or not?
I do believe that we need to resort to Spanish in classes sometimes, especially in the beginning levels. In my experience, for example, the lesson that I recorded and I'll upload it for this past task, I resorted to Spanish several times because these were students for the second module. They're aiming at A1 level, and in my experience, when you try, I mean, there are two different, and what I know, two different scenarios. Scenario number one is a school scenario. In the school scenario, like John said, you have a lot of time, you have the whole year in order to do a process in which you get students from like Spanish switching code at the beginning, and then up to the end you reach a point where you can give them instructions in English, and that's okay. But there are some other scenarios, like in these courses that I'm talking about, when I'm having students that most of them they don't really want to learn English. They're completing a requisite for their pensum so they can graduate. So there's a lot of struggle that I underwent the first stages, and then we decided, like all the teachers, okay, for the first 2 or 3 modules, we'll try to give the instructions in both English and Spanish so they can get to work. Because what happened? Once we decided that we will only speak English, and no matter what, we will try to do gesture, mimes, whatever it is, in order like to avoid speaking Spanish in the classroom. And we measured the time, and we were wasting 25% of the time in the class just to getting students to understand a simple instruction for a task. So when we measure the time in a 50-hour course, we were spending 25% of the total 50 hours that the student was supposed to be completing tasks in order to, become users of a target language. We said, like, okay, for the first levels, we will try to do this, and it's been working better for the new promotions. So I'm in favor of using L1 in the beginning levels, and then gradually taking students from, not using Spanish at all. Because one other thing that we need to consider is that once a student is moving from a beginner level to an intermediate or an advanced level, the level of the instructions also become more complex, because you can tell a student to complete a simple task in a beginning level, but in a complex level, you might want a student reasoning about some complex concepts, and language for providing the instructions will also change.
Okay, so Adding to what we mentioned about the aspects, we have the schools restriction or policies and the level of difficulty of the task. Sometimes we can have beginner students work on a complex cognitive task, and we know they don't have the language to answer the question, but I mean, we don't have the English knowledge to answer in English, that we can do it in Spanish. So we are developing in that case important skills. They understand instructions in English, and we allow them to give the answer in Spanish since it is a complex answer. So the level of complexity also is important, as Giancarlo mentioned. Blanca wrote that sometimes students feel more comfortable and confident using Spanish, so we need to balance a little bit how much Spanish can they use. Taking into account what we already mentioned, how much they already know and how much they have been exposed to English, so they do have the language to answer in English, or we can have them answer in Spanish. And Liliana wrote, I think speaking in English is very important, that we need L1 in order to make sure students understand all the instructions. So we can also use Spanish in those cases when they don't get the idea, they don't get the instructions. So, and we have done several things, examples, we have model activity, if they don't get the idea, so we can use Spanish, we should use Spanish at that moment.
Tisha, I know it's the case, but for example, in my case, I am a math teacher in English, and sometimes I have to explain the process in Spanish, but I try to speak always in English and try to maybe use a lot of drawings, or try to show the signs or the numbers in English all the time. But for example, when it's in a process, for example, the division process is so hard for the child in second and third grade. And I try to explain several times in English, but when I can know that, or I can analyze that my students have problems with to understand the process, I have to explain in Spanish. So I try to repeat the verbs. For example, when I say bring down the next number, I say bring down, and I say bajo la cifra siguiente, and then I don't have to say again in Spanish, so they know that, or that when I say bring down is because they have to bajar la cifra siguiente. So sometimes with some verbs, I try to explain in Spanish, but no all the instruction incomplete, no. I try to sometimes we just with special words, with special verbs that I use Spanish with my student in the second and the third grade. I know it's the same with science, or obviously with English maybe it's different, but I talk about my case in math. And in general, with the process is really, really hard for them. I have to explain in Spanish.
Okay, that example that you gave us is useful for the aspect that Giancarlo mentioned about saving some time of the class, not spending like a lot of minutes trying to have the students understand one concept or one word. So you translate it into Spanish, and then you move it again into English, and you will continue using English after they have related the idea. And so it doesn't take too much of the lesson to have students understand what you're trying to say. Good. Any other aspect that should be taken into account when deciding when to use Spanish?
Teacher, me.
Flor.
Well, in my particular case, teacher, when I have the opportunity to study or to teach English children, I decide not to speak in Spanish because I consider that children have an excellent capability to catch the idea of any word, of any phrase. And if I know that the children don't understand any word, I try to show any object or to explain in another way, because we are teaching with children. That when I have the opportunity to work with adults, beginners but adults, is different, because I know that our brain all time is learning and memorizing, but it's more difficult for an adult. So in that case, I consider that sometimes, only sometimes, it's necessary to speak in Spanish. In this case, in Spanish, in order to understand that the students understand any topic or any idea, but not for children.
Okay, probably that is related to the fact that adults get desperate when they don't get the idea when you are speaking in English. So, as you mentioned, sometimes when we use different gestures or ways to make ourselves understood with adults and they don't get what we're trying to say, we need to use Spanish because they don't read gestures as well as children sometimes, or they just want to understand faster. It is mm, it is difficult to make adults understand that learning a language when we are adults is a process that requires them to make some things easy first to move to more difficult things later. Because when we are adults, we can solve difficult problems that if we don't have the language to do that in English, so we, in a way, move to easier activities in order to help adults get some language, and they sometimes they don't understand that. Okay, Giancarlo wrote young adults, and adults get distracted when they don't get the instructions. Right.
Teacher,
Andres?
yes, teacher. I have a question, just a reflection. What about if you are going to study English abroad, for example, in China, and the teacher just speak Chinese and English?
So if you are really interested in learning English, you will try to find out the idea. Some people don't. Some people don't. Even if they are immersed in the culture, they don't get it easily. So it depends on many aspects. But for sure, it is more difficult here because students know we speak Spanish. So even though we try to say everything in English, they have some probably hear us talking in Spanish, so they know that we understand. But well, some teachers use different ways to make their students just use English, and it's like to have them bring a candy, for example, if they use more than, let's say, four words in Spanish during the lesson. So it is a way like to push them to use English. But well, there is not like a general rule, because since all children or students are different, so we need to find out what is going on with them. Why some students cannot get our gestures or have more difficulties, and try to find a way to help them. That's a more complex task. We have a lot of students in the class. But the idea is to be like to have that ability of recognizing that those differences and to try to help as much as we can, which is complex. Well, Giancarlo wrote They take in ESL, students take more time in the instruction giving process, and they also take advantage of the immersion outside of the classroom. TDLP is used a lot in those courses because they don't care about grammar much. They focus on meaning and communication to complete real-life tasks. We actually choose those approaches more than the other ones, and we have discussed the reasons why they work better. As if we provide students with more opportunities to make decisions, it is more easy to engage them in the lesson. If we control all the lesson, all the stages, all the exercises, we don't give them time to create something. So we can find students that don't get connected with the topic or with the task. So that's why those approaches or methods that take into account the students' opportunity to make decisions and create are more effective.
I can complete a little bit an answer to what I just wrote, and yeah, definitely that's a different. One thing is English as a foreign language, and the other thing is English as a second language. English as a foreign language is usually the teaching of English to speakers of a one common native language. And in that case, as we read in the previous class, uh, we observed that the pedagogical benefits of using L1 as a means in order to get students to learn in the target language. But in those scenarios, I can tell the story or share the experience of someone who works in a university that I work for. He went to Canada for 2 months into immersion process, and when he got there, he was taking classes with people from China, Russia, France, Brazil, many peoples from around the world. So the L1 was not a pedagogical means or resource in order for them to learn the language. So basically, what they did was as I mean, I'm using his words. I cannot tell if this is true or not. Like the instruction giving process was, it would take longer. So lessons were focused more on completing things like how to buy a ticket in the subway, for example. And there was no lesson like, okay, today we're gonna learn like simple present or that kind of stuff that is usually taught here in Colombia. And they didn't care in the end of the class, like the teacher wouldn't explain, oh, you made a mistake in the grammar that you used here or you used there. In the end, what the teacher wanted to know is that you were able to communicatively complete a task that you would probably require to use once you left the classroom, because they were in Toronto. And obviously, as soon as you left the classroom, you will probably need to complete one of these tasks in English, no matter how you will use your grammar. So there's two different approaches, and they usually require two different ways of getting at the students.
Okay, yeah, that's regarding John's idea on if, or for example, on what about if the student is in China and there are only two languages available to communicate, which are Chinese and English. So the person who decides to move to those contexts is a person who has decided to use any strategy to make himself or herself understood. Pictures, gestures, and will do like what he or she needs him in order to communicate. What happens is that here they know that we speak Spanish, so that's that's more difficult. That's easier for them to be more, let's say, lazy, because some of them is not because they are lazy, but because they just don't have the ability. They just don't have the strategies. For example, to use pictures or to be more careful about the gestures. So we can teach them some strategies like we just explain that again, like using those simple questions, or have them like by using those simple questions like could you write the word on the board, We can have them then look at the dictionary for the meaning of the word, etc., to use other strategies so we avoid them using Spanish. We help them to use just English, but sometimes we need to teach them those strategies. Okay, thanks for those ideas.
Teacher, sorry, what I wanted to reach is that there are techniques to teach English just in English. That is the case, for example, when you go here in Colombia to the British Council, you are going to have there some teachers that they don't speak Spanish and they teach you just in English. I hear from some experts, actually there in the British Council, that if you're going to teach, sometimes you can use the L1 just if necessary. It's not forbidden, but I know there are some techniques and some things that we can do in order to speak just in English. That is the case. I know it's very, very difficult, but there are ways to do it.
Yes, as you mentioned, there are techniques to promote more English talking time and to avoid the use of the Spanish. But it's important also to take into account what we mentioned before related to the complexity of the task and basically and the students' previous knowledge. So if we know that we have a group of beginners, the task should be easy. So we know that the language that they will use is the language that they know is adequate to answer the task. But if we increase the level of complexity of the task, that we want to develop other skills like having the students give their opinions. So we know that we are helping them being critical, but then they don't have the language. So we will expect them to speak in Spanish to answer the question or answer the task. So that's why different aspects need to be taken into account when we decide how much Spanish should be spoken in the class, or if there is a total restriction of the use of the Spanish. More comments about the use of L1 or Spanish in the classroom? Okay, we're going to finish by giving ideas on how or what activities require different seating arrangements, so circles, orderly rows, or separate tables or horseshoe. So which activities are benefited from those ways of arranging the class? When do we usually ask students to order their chairs in rows?
Well, in my case, I asked the students to join in order to develop a sharing activity, and they can join in groups by making circles, and sometimes I use the U shape in the classroom in order to make expositions. and I ask them to organize the chairs in line when we are going home.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Lita and Giancarlo wrote that orderly rooms are used for them when they have students take tests, when they need to focus their attention to their own work, so when they ask them to work individually. Also, what about horseshoe and circles? When do we have that type of seating arrangement? For debates, for speaking activities, right? For debates, so everybody can see each other's faces, and so everybody can interact with anybody, right? For any speaking activity that involves all the class. Liliana wrote, I think that when we are going to talk, play, or sing, we can make a circle. Exactly. We need to see our faces in order to communicate better. Okay. For teamwork, we can have the separate tables, right? What about giving instructions? What type of seating arrangement do you use for giving instructions? Like we can give an instruction using any seating arrangement, but what would be the one or the ones that are more effective? Okay, in Lida's case, she likes to use horseshoe, so everybody can see each other, or everybody can see her when she gives the instruction. Good. Any ideas regarding seating arrangements? Liliana wrote, it's difficult to give instructions when the students are working in groups. Exactly. So when they are working in groups, they actually have a different pace. They go in different parts of the task. So what we do is to move around the groups to see in what stage each group is and to give instructions accordingly to the stage where they are. But it would be better if we use the general instruction by using the horseshoe or the circle, and then we have the movie groups using separate tables. More ideas about teaching the arrangement, the setting arrangement? Okay, so here like we have the list of what we reviewed tonight. So among the skills that we need to develop, we have the empathy to understand students, personalities, reactions, and likes, among others. To apply effective strategies to give instructions, to apply effective discipline strategies, to give clear explanations, and what we didn't discuss about changing roles according to the activities, but we discussed the idea of giving the students more opportunities to participate. So we need to control less the class and give the students more room to be part of the lesson. Do you guys have questions about this or about the task that you have this week?
No, teacher, the only thing I'm worried is about the video recording.
Okay, but you mentioned that this week students are like doing the different activities, and next week they will start classes. Is it
Yeah.
right?
Teacher, I have a question about the quiz or the questionnaire for this week.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to know if I have 2 hours or 1 hour and a half to solve it, because on the plan for set the first part 2 hours, and then limit time 1 hour and a half. I don't know what.
Okay, it's 2 hours, but I'm going to check. I'm going to check if I said 2 hours or less, but it's 2 hours.
Okay. Thank you very much, teacher.
Okay. How many
Teacher,
questions?
are the
Check right now.
to be about the whole material?
Yes, but they are like simple questions about, for example, the skills that were mentioned, the type of the way the map of 21st century skills is considers the way the map is organized and the skills that are considered in the map. So they're actually not difficult questions about the videos and the readings. I'm gonna tell you right now the number of questions that it has. Okay, it only had 7 questions and they are multiple choice. As usual, the questionnaires are multiple choice.
I might have one last question, and it has to do with since the video recordings make up the 40% of the whole lesson. When more or less do you think we might have the grades in order to do the math?
Okay. Well, what I have, so far you have like the grades of the first 2 tasks. I'll try to work as fast as I can to check the videos. Let me check the timetable. Because as you are a big number of, you are a group that has a lot of students, I need at least 2 weeks to check all the videos. And let me check the timetable.
I was simply saying, I don't mean to put any pressure. I understand that we are a lot and the recordings are long, so I was just curious because this is 40%, so.
Sure, yes, it's important and I need to give you feedback soon. And I want to check where you need to write the second lesson plan, because that's my deadline to give you feedback. That is September 23rd, which means that I have 1 week more to check yes, so at the end of next week, I need to give you feedback about the video, because on September 30th, the last week of this month, you need to write the second lesson plan.
Teacher, but we are going to make 3 video recordings.
Yes, you need to video record 3 lessons.
So we go through the November 30.
Yes, you need to video record three lessons, and the last lesson is recorded on November 18th.
Okay.
Because the course ends on November 30th. Yeah.
Sorry, teacher, maybe I'm going to have some troubles about the groups, because maybe I'm not going to have the same group for the third lesson plan. Maybe it's going to be a different group.
Okay, Andre, so that's not a problem because I will check if your class has a coherent sequence. So maybe if the objective that you set for the lesson matches the activities that you took to the class, and if the lesson promotes communication. So if you video record a third lesson with a different group, what I will check is that there is coherence between your communicative objective and the sequence of the lesson.
Okay, teacher, is it good if I change it for the next lesson plan, the lesson plan of the last class? Because my first lesson plan was different from the class I sent you.
I know some of you had that problem because some of you, well, by the time you wrote the lesson, you had a different group of students. So by the time that you video recorded, there was not the same. It was not the same class that you lesson planned. But again, what I will check is the the sequence, the coherence in the sequence between the communicative objective and the activities that are proposed. If you write it or if you video record it, that's what I check.
Okay, I got it, teacher. Thanks.
Okay, Liliana wrote, is it possible to share us a good video class in order to learn some new strategies? Yes, Liliana, I will send all of you a link of a video, but that is not with beginners. It is with intermediate students. And I will check others, but tomorrow I will send all of you a video about a class with pre-intermediate students. Yeah, Carol, I'm teaching 3 different groups, so I'm planning on recording each one of them. So that's okay. Okay, any other question? Good. So I hope you all have a good night, and email me if you have any doubt. Right? Thank you very much for all your participation, for sharing your experience.
Thank you, teacher. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.